Hi, today I'm going to tell you how and where to put a knocking point on your bowstring. I've had quite a few people asking me, so I thought I'd better get onto it and have a go at doing it. So, before we actually get started, we're going to go on whereabouts to put a knocking point on the bow. There's two ideas, and I've drawn this picture up just to give you a bit of a brief overview. Some people will put their knocking point underneath the bowstring, the arrow, and some people want to put the knocking point above the arrow. Myself personally, I prefer under the arrow in the fact that I can shoot different arrows. So these are different size diameter arrows, and of course we're going to have different sort of nocks. So if we go from underneath, if we put this above the knocking point and it sits onto the arrow shelf, the arrow is going to be sitting like that. If we had, for an exaggeration, just to show you what happens, if we were to put this as an arrow and we sat above, it would sit like that, and nothing too serious. But if we decided to have a knocking point above the arrow, if I put the arrow onto the bowstring underneath and then try and sit on the shelf, we've got the arrow shooting way up in there, and you won't get any sort of release going on that at all nicely. Whereas the arrow that you set it up with works fine. So that's the two things, and there's no correct way, no wrong way, but it's the way you want to do it is what counts. So that's just my ideas. So there's two type of nocks we can do. We could use a posi nock. You can buy one of these, and you do need to have a pliers, or in the past I have used just normal pliers and just slowly crimp it on. The beauty of them is once you lock one of these on, as they say, posi nock, it's going to stay there. The only problem with it is if you decide in the end that it's not where you want it, it's quite difficult to get them back off. The way I'm going to teach is using just a bit of dental floss or a bit of string or cotton, whatever. And so all we're going to do is wrap it on. So here we go. I'm doing my son's bow, so we're just going to grab the arrow, put it onto the bow, and we want it around about 90 degrees. You can, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, you can spend a lot of time working out exactly whereabouts it is going to go. I work on the idea as long as it's slightly more that way than that way, because if we're shooting it that way, it's going to have to get past your arm and it's not going to do it too well. Whereas this way, what's going to happen is it's going to lift off slightly. So there is fine tuning of arrows here. Since I'm using wooden arrows all the time and different types all the time, I don't get too concerned, because you can set it up perfect for one arrow and it's not going to be quite perfect for the next one. So in this case, we're going to go about there. It looks a little bit lower. Perfect. Put it down there. And then just whip it on. So all you do is lay it down like that. Pinch it on where you want it. And then we're just trying to build up a little ball where it's going to go. And you can make this as big or as small as you want, really. In some ways, I don't get too worried about making them huge. As long as you know where you put your arrow in relation to it, it's going to work. Then we make a loop out of a bit of spare, lay that over, and then just start going over top of that. And normally I find about 8 times is pretty good. If you get too many, you find it hard sometimes to pull it through. We'll see, here we go. And then once you've done that, poke the end through the loop, grab the other end and pull that all so you put under. Pull that tight. And then just cut the tag ends off. Cut the bowstring if you can help it. If you can't, buy yourself a new bowstring. And then just a bit of glue. Just smear that in. You'd use a bit of nail varnish, whatever you can find really. And that is ready to go once it dries out. So now, just before we finish, as I was saying earlier, the knocking points, because I'm using different arrows and so they're not all the same, I actually quite often don't really bother with a knocking point. They were made for target shooting, and it's a bit like a blind person in some ways. Because they're blind, they're actually more in tune with what's around them, and if you make sure that you know where you're putting the arrow on each time before you shoot, even without the knocking point, after a while it becomes ingrained in you to have it in the right place. What can happen with a knocking point is something happens with the string, or it gets knocked around, and you rely on that knocking point to put it in the right place all the time, and it's in the wrong place and you don't pick up on it straight away. Whereas if you didn't have a knocking point, you would put it in the place that you felt was the right place right from the start. But anyway, I hope that helps everybody on their thing, and happy shooting.